Hotep, and welcome to Matters of Diversity with Dr. B. It's really good to have you here today, February 19th, talking about World Social Justice Day, which is tomorrow, February 20th. Today, to talk about his career and what he's doing at the University of Central Florida, I am excited to bring to you all Dr. Jonathan Cox. Dr. Cox is an assistant professor in sociology, and he is a race scholar, studying the impacts of race and racism in the United States. So what better person to have come to be a part of what we're going to talk about today during this Black History Month on the matters of race. His current research focuses on racial and ethnic identities, racial ideology, and the experiences of college students in diversity and inclusion processes. Jonathan is a proud graduate of Hampton University with a graduate degree from the Pennsylvania State University and the University of Maryland. So he's been doing this thing, education. Can't take that away from anybody, right? We'll talk a little bit about that today as well. So Jonathan's work as a faculty member and researcher is also informed by his previous work in college administration and multicultural affairs. So without any further ado, please join me in having the platform, the floor, Dr. Jonathan Cox. How are you, my man?
I'm very good, very good. Thanks for having me here. I'm really glad to have this opportunity.
Well, I'm glad that you have taken the time out. What we're trying to do with this podcast is really kind of expose and provide the university community with individuals who are doing the work in diversity and inclusion around the campus. And who better than Jonathan Cox? From the day that I met you, I felt like we had this bond and we were able to kind of communicate and talk. And I really appreciate what you bring to the table. A couple of weeks ago, wow, it's actually crazy that it's been a couple of months ago, you helped us bring Sean Harper to campus. And that was really a positive thing for us. And so I just want to check in with you right now and see how you're doing. What's going on?
Things are good. I think like many of us at this point, part of it is just kind of survival, right? I'm here, I'm alive. So in that sense, I'm very happy, but outside of that, I think things are going well. Loving my work that I'm doing here at UCF. I'm feeling really engaged with the community in Orlando, getting to know what's going on here, this is my fourth year, I guess, living here in Orlando. Definitely not from Florida. So this has been interesting, right? Especially this past, this around this time where we're in the winter phase. I'm from Ohio, so this is nothing like winter to me. But everything is good. Life is great. So I'm really, really happy overall.
So give us a little bit of a taste of who you are in terms of your research and what you do as a sociologist.
Sure. Again, I like to describe myself as a race scholar. For me, again, what that means is that I focus kind of all of my research goes through the lens of race. I think that race is just one of, if not the most significant social identities, social constructions, right? Social realities that exist right now. I think there's so many things that you can tie race to. Or you can see that as a lens. So that's really how I approach my work. And so beyond that, I'm really, really interested in racial ideologies. So how people understand race as a concept. Right, the dominant ideology in the United States racially is colorblindness. Right, that's what's been happening ever since the civil rights movement. And so I look at that. I'm also really big into racial identities, particularly understanding how there are differences that exist within race. A lot of people tend to homogenize folks, right, and say like all Black people are the same, all Asians, right? They lump everybody into these groups. So I'm really interested in helping to break that down because there are so many differences, right? Even if we're talking about Black History Month now, there are so many different types of Black people, right? And so folks often will talk about African Americans and exclude other types of Blacks, right? We have, immigrant Black populations, folks who are immigrating from Africa, from the Caribbean, from all these other places. There are Black people who are Latino and Hispanic, that are Asian, right? So there's all these differences that exist within the different races. And so a lot of my research tries to pull a lot of that out. Then I also look at just the experiences of college students. Again, given my background in student affairs, I'm really interested in how students our experience in college, particularly through racialized lenses. As a graduate of an HBCU, that's something that really came to mind once I started attending and working at other schools that were predominantly white, just to see those differences. And so I like to explore a lot of those different factors. And then more recently, I've been kind of digging into a lot of the work that you get into as well, just around issues of diversity, inclusion, equity. Because again, I think that's really important. It ties well to a lot of things that I've done historically throughout my career and my life as well. And I'm just really interested to understand how people think about diversity, right? What do they even think when they hear the word? How do they try to implement it? What changes can be made to make things more inclusive across the board? So that's really what I'm looking at right now in terms of all the research that I'm doing.
Nice. So I have a question for you with regards to race.
Sure.
Break it down for us, because there's some people who believe that there's no such thing as race, that is a man-made concept. And so help us understand what race really is, and how we should really kind of utilize what we call it to be in our lives.
Sure. And so it's understandable that a lot of people get confused about race, or maybe argue about what it is and how it works, because in part it is made up. Right? It is a social construction. It's something that was created. And actually, what's interesting is that the United States is one of the main purveyors or originators of like our concept of race now, socially at least. Right? A lot of people exported America's creation of race right from the beginning. And so yeah, race is socially constructed. One of the ways that I like to explain it, that a lot of other scholars like to explain it as well, is that race may be socially constructed, but it is real in its consequences. And so in that sense, race is a very real thing, even though it's made up. Right, there are no biological, right, genetic differences based on race. Right, if we think about the human genome, over 99% of our genetics are exactly the same across race. There's actually much more variation that you can find within race than across race. Right, so two Black people or two Asian people will have more difference in their genetics than would exist between a white person and a Black person, or a Black person and an Asian person. Right, that's how close we are as humans. But again, so when we think about this, people have historically tried to suggest that there are biological ties to race. Certain racial groups have maybe like, again, ties to Black History Month, like the elongated bones and muscles in Black people. That's what makes them better athletes. Right? That's complete hogwash. That's not true at all. There is no biological basis, but again, it's real because we made it a real thing. And so the ways in which we categorize people, the stereotypes that exist, and again, that this has been happening for hundreds of years at this point, it has become a real aspect of our societies. And so there are really strong social implications for race. And that's why we can look at it. If you know certain things about somebody, like their race, if you combine that with maybe like their zip code or other factors that exist in their lives, then you can very easily start to paint pictures of what their life might be like, particularly with regards to how they may experience racism or discrimination, or stereotyping, negative stereotyping in particular, based on their race. So it's made up, it is completely fake, but at this point it's real in its consequences, right? So we can't ignore it, or else we're still gonna have all these issues with racism that come out of it.
So what should we know biologically about, we're not using the concept of race, how do we then kind of talk about how we kind of, because of our DNA, are different?
Yeah, so again, when we think about race, so really what we end up seeing and talking about is that phenotype, right? So there are differences that exist in terms of the way we look, right? Some people have more melanin or less melanin. You have darker skin, lighter skin. Some people who are coming from different parts of the world in different regions may have a different facial structure, nose, bone structure, things like that, different hair type, right? So we do see those types of differences, which is why you can see a lot of people look very similar if they're from certain regions around the world. But again, aside from that, genetically, there aren't really any significant differences. And what's also crazy too, once you start to look into this and see how it breaks down, is you could think about two parents who come together and have a child, or two individuals, right? They don't have to be parents. Two people who have a child together. Their children, if they have more than one, can look vastly different from one another, and vastly different from even the people who they came from. Right. And a lot of that is just because that shows the the ways in which race doesn't really work out like people would think it does all the time, right? I mean, there's actually a really famous story, and I can't remember the names of them, but there's a set of twins that came out where they're two sisters, and one of these twins, you may have seen these pictures. One of them is she is your stereotypical looking black girl, right? Very dark brown skin, the hair that's very similar to that style, right? More kinky, curly in that sense. Her twin sister, again, twin. She is pale white skin, looks like an Irish one, which you would think of as an Irish girl. Bright red hair, very light white skin, right? And these people came out of the same person. They're twins. They were in the same womb together, right? And so these are some of the ways that we see this, race play out. It's really just about the look, and for us as humans, that's just one of the things. It's one of the things we see first, right? We tend to look at people and classify them, and so we see race first, we see gender first, or these are the things that you see immediately, and so it just kind of gives us clues in that sense. So if we think about some of the spaces in which I came from again, right? So start off at an HBCU. One of the things that really got me to the point of wanting to be a sociologist and have some of these experiences is the transition from an HBCU to a predominantly white institution, right? So I went to Hampton University for undergrad. Again, one of the predominantly Black institutions that we have, historically Black institutions. Pretty much all Black people there are obviously people who are not Black there, right? There were white students, white professors, et cetera, other people of different races, but predominantly Black. Again, 4 years of my life I spent in this really, really Black-centric space. And then immediately after that, I went into grad school at Penn State University, which was like the exact opposite, right? So many white people at this institution. At the time I was going, over 40,000 students, probably over 85% of them were white. So it was a significantly different experience. And so in that, right, seeing how people were experiencing that space, particularly Black students and other students of color, my own self, right, being involved in the campus community. It really just got me thinking about my own experiences at HBCU, what that was like, and then what it was like to be in a different space, or the world space.
You hear me?
And so that was really, really interesting for me, right? And it really pushed me in this direction of studying race, wanting to understand it, particularly identity and experiences that people are having.
So we know that you have become Dr. Cox. What led you to entering into the field of sociology?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I started off in student affairs, right? That's what I did. My first master's degree was in student affairs and higher ed, and so I really wanted to work with student populations. I just found that to be really interesting. As an undergrad, I was highly involved on campus as a student leader, and so once I figured out that you could get paid to do that, I was like, absolutely, sign me up. And so I did that. I worked for a few years after my master's degree. And what I found was that I really, really enjoyed the student contact, working with students. But a lot of the things that I was doing were actually more alternative forms of teaching. And teaching was something that I kind of fought against my entire life. Both of my parents are educators. And so I was always like, that's not for me. I'm not going to be a teacher. I refuse. I just didn't want to do that. But then through my own experiences, really working with folks, I actually started this group that was specifically for Black men. And it was built, I structured it like a class, except the students didn't get credit for it necessarily, but we met weekly. There were readings that we were doing about what it meant to be a man and what it meant to be a Black man. And so we had a lot of these discussions, and I did that for several semesters. I believe it's actually still going at the institution that I was at. And I discovered that I really liked teaching, and I wanted to see what that was like. But what I found out was that because I didn't have a PhD, the pathway to becoming a professor was very limited, right? I wasn't allowed to do that in the ways I wanted to at that school. So I decided I need to go back and get a PhD. And in figuring out what I wanted to do, since I decided I did not want to do higher ed as a PhD program, I looked at my own interests, the classes that I might like to teach. I thought about my own worldviews and discovered that it was really in line with sociology, right? I tend to think a lot about social structures, how people are interacting with one another, and what that means. And so that led me to sociology. All the things that I was reading and studying, it really came from a sociological lens. And so as I started digging deeper into that, I found that was just the field that was for me. It really matched how I was thinking about things, and then gave me the opportunity then as a professor to connect with students on a different type of level.
So when you think about how you share your message with others, especially when you think about being on a predominantly white campus and having such a distinct research agenda, How are you perceived by students? How are you perceived, you believe, by your colleagues in the Department of Sociology?
Sure. I think overall, I would say it's a mixed bag, which I think probably matches the experience of a lot of professors and of color in particular, particularly Black men. I would imagine that yourself, you've had some very similar experiences. And so, I mean, I think in terms of students, overall, there's a positive response. I think maybe just part of it is my own style in terms of teaching. I'm a generally, laid back person. I also teach a lot of the courses that I teach. I like to bring in things that I'm very passionate about. And so I think that comes through. And so students tend to respond to that aspect of myself and that presentation. I have noticed, though, there are times where some students, may question me more than I feel like I questioned some of my own professors, right? Whether or not they, maybe they believe that I'm feeding them opinions, right? And I'm often having to remind them, like, no, this is not an opinion. This is based on empirical fact, right? That has been proven over and over again, or
Right.
at least shown through data, right? So I do see that pushback often. I do think that speaking of, from more of an intersectional lens, given that I am a man, I do think I receive much more of a benefit of the doubt than a lot of my female colleagues
Oh, wow.
do. And as I've seen them get questioned all the time, particularly like, well, women of color. That's a huge thing where they're getting questioned a
Right.
lot. Right. And so, but I do get that mixed bag. And in terms of colleagues, again, overall, I think it's really positive, especially in my department. I think the folks that I work with are really great, and almost all of them, probably all of them, right? I'm saying almost because I always like to leave room for just maybe there's like one or two people that I don't know about, but everybody that I know about really supports my work. They think it's great. They always have positive things to say about the work that I'm doing, the responses that I'm getting from folks, outside of UCF or inside of UCF. And so I think it's supportive in that sense. And I get that outside of sociology as well.
Yeah.
Although again, that mixed bag, some folks in some areas, since you were talking about specifically studying race, in my own PhD program, and then outside of sociology here again too, there are folks that think that when you study race, particularly as a person of color, you're doing, that quote unquote me search, right? That supposedly is easier than what they're doing or less critical in some way.
Right.
Right. And so I do experience that a lot, right? The questions when I'm doing presentations from people that I'm like, you didn't ask that of the last person that talked that didn't look like me. Why are you asking me?
Right.
And so there's that too.
That's really interesting. And I wonder if it's about a day and time of a situation as well. Because when I first came on board as an instructor, it's close to 20 years ago now, one of the things that I had to deal with were students who just did not believe that I was teaching them what my colleagues were teaching, right? I had students go to my colleagues and question my credentials and my ability and whether or not what I was teaching was true. And so I'm thinking maybe there's a different time now that, that maybe you are being more perceived as an expert in that area. I also came up in a time when there weren't very many PhDs that looked like me. And where I taught, there were students who told me that they went through their K through 12 experience and their undergraduate experience, because I teach at the master's level, before they even had anyone who looked like me instructing them in the classroom. And so that's a really interesting thing, to go through all your schooling experiences and never ever be instructed by a person of color.
Yeah, and so it's interesting that you talk about the differences that may exist with time, because obviously we know that many things have changed in our country and around the world, but at the same time, a lot of things haven't. Right? There are still students that come to me now that say you're the first Black professor that I've ever had, right? Ever, just like you said, K through 12 through college. They may be some of them are at the undergrad, some of them may be at the
Right.
graduate level, and they say the same things. Or I'm one of maybe one, particularly if you're talking about Black male
Mhm.
professors or teachers of any kind, right?
And then,
I think I only had one up until I
and
got
add
to
to the
college.
mix that not only did they not have you, but they did not see you even in the academy,
No, exactly right, and that's
right?
definitely it's so crazy that that's that's still a thing, right? And I think there are some places that do a lot better than others in some areas, right? But overall, that's still a major struggle that we see.
Right, right. So when you think about UCF and what UCF offers to our community, what is it do you think that we as faculty, especially those of us of color, need to be doing to broaden the scope of what our disciplines are and how we really add to the literature and we add to the research base that's out there when we have colleagues and others who think that our scholarship is not as impactful.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, so honestly, I think, if I really let out what is inside of me with regards to this
Wait,
concept.
let's go back a second and just say, let's unpack that statement right there, because that's a really
Yeah.
real thing, right? So if I allow myself to really go there, what's that mean for you?
Yeah, so I mean, and I think it ties exactly to kind of where I'm going with this is that I don't think that we meaning in particular people of color who are scholars of color and other marginalized scholars, right? Because it doesn't have to be just race. There's not just people of racial
Right.
minorities who are marginalized, right? But folks who do marginalized scholarship or scholarship on quote unquote the fringes, right? Often they're seen as not having strong enough contributions or not being as rigorous, right, as other work, right? So we're often not allowed to be our full selves, to bring ourselves to it, because it's not given the same amount of credit as what other people may be doing, even though they may be doing the exact same stuff, just in a different, field, right, or a different a different area of study. And so, yeah, for me, that's again, I like to bring my full self, and I think I'm the type of person that more often than not, I'm just going to go ahead and do that, and then you just have to deal with it. But I recognize that lots of other people don't, and there, even with me, there are still times where I'm like, maybe I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go ahead and bring Jonathan all the way out today, because folks may not, the response it may not be worth it in that particular situation.
You don't want to be the angry black man.
So, absolutely not, right? You don't want to get those perception of being that, right, of being the one who goes against things all the time, or it's just, it's a lot sometimes. And so, so I think that's so if I take that head off and just kind of allow myself, which I think this is a space where I can do so. I think it's actually much less about what we can do, because I think that most of us are already doing it. It's what the academy needs to do to change, to accept and allow the things that we do and give us credit for the things that are being done, right? We're not, I think that UCF, when we think about UCF in particular, right, the type of institution that we are, there are so many folks on our campus who are engaged in research or outreach and other things with the community, the broader community, whether that be Orlando or around the nation, around the world, right? People are working with folks outside this country as well. But a lot of times, again, unless you are writing that stereotypical article that goes into a very high ranked journal, or something like that, then it doesn't really count. You don't get that much credit. And so I think part of it is the recognition, and then another part of it is that incentivization of our work, because again, right, as faculty, as researchers of any kind, or even as administrators, right, you are judged and rewarded for certain types of work, and other work is kind of pushed down as like you don't get that much credit for, and so you're not really incentivized to go out and do the work that you might otherwise be doing, or you got to be one of those people that's willing to like do it all at the same time, right? And so do all this stuff you don't get that much credit for, and do the stuff that you need to. So yeah, and I think also, again, if you change the incentivization of a lot of this stuff and the way it's perceived, then I would imagine that a lot more folks, right, a lot of us who maybe aren't doing it, who would really want to, would actually start doing that a lot more.
Yeah. How do we, as Black men, bring more men into the academy?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, I think a lot of it is that visibility, like you were talking about, right? The fact that so many of us, growing up, don't get to see that what you and I are doing and other people like us are doing is even an option, right? Like it's not an option at all. My mother, for instance, she is a professor herself, right, at the University of Dayton in Ohio, and I have memories of maybe like one other Black faculty, particularly a male that I saw at that institution, right? And again, it's at the time. I know at this point, it's a lot of years later. There are a lot more people, I would imagine, there too. But yeah, I didn't even see it, right? And I was on a college campus. I grew up on a college campus, and so if I don't see it there, and I'm in that privileged space, what about all the rest of the folks who aren't in those spaces, right? And so
Mm,
if we can do something to make ourselves more visible, so get more people in the pipeline early on to see, maybe have more, educators who are Black men, through that experience, so people don't go through their entire K through 12 experiences without seeing somebody that looks like
right,
them, except for the janitor or some other kind of groundskeeper or something or
right,
security,
right.
right? Those are some of the ways that we can do
Cafeteria
that, I
worker.
think.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So thank
Mhm.
you for that. Thank you for that. I think that's really important for us to kind of be able to put out there because that goes to universities recognizing what the recruitment process needs to be, how to retain people, right? Because mentorship is really important in regards to
Yes.
helping people move forward. You spoke about something that I talk about very often, and you said that your mother has her PhD. And so that was
Mhm.
a role model for you to move forward. You know how rare that is in the Black community? When I
Oh,
think
yes.
about it, even though my mother has a master's degree, she got her master's degree when I was in high school. And
Mhm.
so she did push us with education. But when I think about my role as a doctor, I see myself as a first generation student, although my parents, my mom anyway,
Mhm.
went to
Mhm.
college, right? Um, and so why I say that is because as a person coming into the academy, I did not have the luxury of having someone who had been there before, maybe not at the same university, but who had been there before to show me the ropes,
Mhm.
right? So I had to rely on mentorship. I had to rely on the fact that somebody was telling me the right things to do so that I could be
Mhm.
successful, right? And if those people had not come into my life, teach me how to write better, teach me how to pay attention to how my scholarship impacts my teaching and all those other things that come with that. I wouldn't necessarily have known, right? And not just my teaching, but how to navigate all things, right? How to navigate the tenure promotion process, how to navigate dealing with staff meetings and being asked to be on different committees and all those other
Mhm.
things. Those things are really things that can affect how someone's tenure run is kind of playing itself out. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's so important, right? I had a similar experience again, even though both of my parents were educators and they both did go to college, and my mom had the advanced degrees. That was one of the things that spurred my educational path was that I noticed it was so obvious the difference between me, given the experiences I had and the privilege that I had, and my friends, the people that I grew up with, right, went to the same schools, same neighborhoods, who didn't have that, right? I saw
Yeah.
the difference that made, and so how that translates to now, right? That like you're saying, the mentorship is so important, but not only just the mentorship for how to navigate some of these processes, but also that cultural capital aspect you're talking about, how to exist in these spaces, how to move, how to be able to bring your full self, right? Because again, we want people to succeed and to be as successful as possible. And in order to do that, you want to bring your whole self. And there's going to be pushback from certain folks, right? So how do you navigate those spaces? How do you respond to people? How do at certain times, duck your head down and get the work done? All these different things, it really matters. And a big part of that is the mentorship, the visibility, the connections with folks. Um, Not just bringing people in and just kind of letting them go, right? Like you got to actually be able to support them through all
Mhm.
these different things, right? And that's
Right.
that's aside from everything you got to do to even get them there in the first place.
Yeah. So what kind of shift did you have to make over the past year because of the pandemic?
Man, so I mean, I think given that we're at UCF and it's already has a significant proportion of students who are purely online, I think that really helped because I was already equipped to teach online classes. I had already been teaching a few since I was here anyway, and thankfully I also had experience with that before I got to UCF too. So
Mm,
for me, particularly given subject matter, right, where it's a lot of what I do in sociology courses is a lot of discussion. We do a lot of readings and we talk about things. There's different activities that we'll do, but you don't need like a lab space or anything. And so for me, it was just, well, how do I make it as engaging virtually as I can do very easily in a physical space? And so some of that was for me was the bigger aspect of engagement was trying to figure out little things to do. I love doing really interactive activities in my classrooms. And
Yeah.
so trying to translate that to this virtual space has been quite challenging in some cases. Some things worked really well, but other things not so much. I think if I was going to say the biggest thing that I had to adjust to was my own expectations of students, particularly
Mm,
just related to their lives, right? You know, we're talking about a pandemic situation that just hasn't occurred to this level in over 100 years, right?
right.
And so this is something that's never happened with the type of technology that we have, with whatever all the other things that are going on in the world. And so just recognizing that, you know, there's some things that I wanted students to do, and it was really more about me. It was more about making me feel a certain type of way, as opposed to creating a space, facilitating a space for them where they can learn as much as possible, and can exist knowing that there's all this other stuff that's playing out in their lives that is pulling them in different directions, or is stressing them out a lot more, or is literally making them sick, right? And so I had to make a lot of adjustments there, and kind
Right.
of let go of a lot of the stuff that I've traditionally have wanted to do, and realize that, you know what, this it's not about me, it's about them. So what's going to help them learn the best? As long
Right.
as that's happening, I can step to the side.
Yeah. So we're here in the middle of February. You know, people make kind of comments about Black History Month in February and it being the shortest month and whatever. And when you think about it, they say shortest month, but it's what, 2 days, 3 days. And so, wow, I think that's really important to pull out in context. You know, it is what it is, right? So, what does Black History Month mean to you? And how do you either celebrate it or how do you invite people in?
Sure. So, I mean, I think, like you said, right, I think that for me, Black history is the whole year, right? Obviously, I know we're celebrating it, we're focusing on it for this month. And so for me, I think February is a chance to, you know, to hone in on it, maybe even more than you would, you know, typically do, you know, throughout the rest of the year, right? You've kind of got people's attention in a different type of a way, than you might throughout the year. And so
Mhm.
I like it because, again, it just gives me an opportunity to reflect. What I really like now is, you know, given just the level of technology that we have with social media and other things, there's all this stuff that is now floating around, within easy access, you know, memes or things that those videos that people might put up on Instagram or
Yeah.
YouTube, that really like pull out all these facts that, quite frankly, I did not learn about at all when I was in school, because, you know,
Right.
the educational system where I was in just wasn't good, and we definitely didn't focus on Black anything, you know, other than a little bit here and there, maybe in February. And so I love that that stuff is so available. It just makes it so much easier to get this information out. And there's all these things that I'm learning and that other people are learning that they had no idea happening. So we can really pull out the contributions of Black Americans throughout history, because there's so many things that folks have, that Black people have done for this country, right? That we just don't simply talk about that often, and that most people don't know about at all. Like some of the inventions, some of the ideas that came about. Like there are things that, well, we are really, as Black people, we have just given this country so much, and so it's great to have an opportunity to really focus in on a lot of that.
Yeah. So right now, when we look at this month and the things that we get to kind of, I guess, celebrate, right? We celebrate the lives of our ancestors. We celebrate the lives of pioneers who have really kind of pushed the needle in terms of social justice and what we can do. Um, Tomorrow is World Social Justice Day, and really it speaks to the need for us to really be advocates for others and to make sure that there's equity. And
Mhm.
social sociology plays a big part in that, in terms of people recognizing our past and just the systems that are in play even in the present, right? And so when you think about the types of things that social justice means to the world and what maybe people should be celebrating tomorrow, what comes up for you with social justice?
Sure. I mean, there's so many different things. I think right now, the one of the biggest things on my mind, and, you know, evidenced on a lot of other people's minds, is just broader movements for Black lives, right? So Black Lives Matter is the mainstream American, not even just American, right? But it started in America. The mainstream way for us to understand, a lot of just the history of brutality that continues today against Black Americans. And so that for me is huge. And why that comes to mind too is not only because of, like we could think about what's been happening in the US. So this past summer, right, almost 11,000 protests, the majority of which were about Black Lives Matter or supported by Black Lives Matter folks that happened just in the United States in the span of the summer, right? 3 or 4 months. There have also been so many other protests for Black lives that have happened all over the world, right? This is something that everybody around the world is thinking about, whether that's, in support of Black American lives or the lives of Black people all around the globe, right there. The African diaspora is huge. And there's so much that's happening, right, in all these different countries and across all the different continents. And so I think that's one of the biggest things that stands out to me is that we're still, pushing for justice for different people. And one of the reasons why I like the Black Lives Matter movement so much is because even though the name of it is Black Lives Matter, right, if you actually read about it and study what they are in support of, it's about so much more than just Black American lives, right? They are really in support of the lives of all oppressed peoples, right? Including many of our white brothers and sisters, right? And so that's why I think that's just such a great movement. I think that's one of the things I think of, obviously because it impacts me as a Black person, but then because I do think that it's something that has just exploded globally as well.
Yeah, it's so funny how people take narratives and spin them to their own benefit, right? And so, when I think about what happened with Colin Kaepernick and his desire to kind of bring to light police brutality and how that narrative got spun to say we don't love our military when we sing, we take a knee, or we're spitting on the flag, so to speak, when we are trying to, during a time of reckoning, a time when we should be reflective, that's really what the message is. And then, so what do you think? I think sometimes Black people bring a lot to the table when it comes to social justice and moving the narrative forward, right? You think about the civil rights movement and what people have done, and they were pioneers, right? And they made it, like you just said, they made it so that others could have a better existence. It wasn't even about just them, right? And other people were able to come along and kind of reap the benefits of the hardness, the toil that people Black-skinned have gone through in order to try to make a difference in this world, to feel like they belong and they have a right to be here. And so when you think about that, when you think about social justice from the lens of someone who's taking a knee, or someone who started this Black Lives Matter movement because of the death of Trayvon Martin and the things that were happening in the world, they were trying to draw attention to those things. And then somebody then comes along and says, well, you don't love your military, and you don't love this, and you don't love that. And then that narrative takes off and wins the day, so to speak, right? And you're like, how? What comes up for you? What's your thoughts about those types of things?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that, it really gets into, again, if we start getting a little bit deeper into ideologies and things, that's when you have to bring in concepts like white supremacy, right? Because that is, if we think, just historically about the United States as we know it, America as we know it, was founded on racist ideology, right? This is not something that America has historically been good at recognizing at all. But that is the truth, right? America, as we know it, was founded on the backs of forced labor of enslaved Black Americans and the eradication of and displacement of indigenous peoples, right? That is the start of it, right? And so you have to start there. And so that ideology has been embedded deeply into the fabric of our society. And so that's really what we see now is when again, marginalized people, whatever that is, whatever groups those are, when they push back against the powers that be, right? Those who have the power and the privilege, who want to maintain their power and privilege, they're going to fight back against it, right? That's just what's going to happen, and that we see that same thing happening around the world. It just looks different based on whatever the particular struggle is in any given place or at any given time. And so when we think about this pushback against, the movement of the Black Lives Matter movement, right, or people taking a knee in order to bring, to bring the views, to show people that they're standing up against, racial injustice or whatever it is that they're fighting against. That's really just an expression of power that does not want to give up its power, right? And so in this case, again, since we're talking about race, the power lies with white Americans collectively. Again, that doesn't mean I'm not saying that white people have easy lives all over the place. That's not what it means, right? When we think about white privilege, really what it all is saying is that race is just not one of the things that's making your life harder. That's really all. It doesn't mean your life is easy, right?
Right.
And so that's what you're saying. It's just people push. It's just that pushback. And again, that happens with whatever it is. No, people who are in power, that's one of the aspects of power. Power wants to maintain itself. And so it's going to fight back. And so maybe we're seeing hopefully some kind of, maybe the death throes of this, although it's been doing this for a long time. So it could last a while longer. But yeah, that's typically what I see. It's just people fighting against it. And a lot of people don't even realize that that is what they're doing, right? I don't think that most people are doing that intentionally, even though some clearly are.
So there was many people in our ancestry who feel as though there was never going to be a change. Even when Sam Cooke's song came out, a change is going to come. People are like, really? Is a change really going to come? And then we started seeing small baby steps, right? We saw the things that have come up for us with the movement of the civil rights movement and women's suffrage. And we started seeing these different things, these changes that were coming along. And then it kind of had like a halt, right? There was it really wasn't a halt, but it really was. There was progression. We were moving forward. We were able to kind of desegregate neighborhoods and do other things to get where we wanted to go, right? Have education under our belt, see people start to have their work respected and kind of validated, but still very, very slow, right? And now in this day and time, when you see the Black Lives Matter movement, you see sometimes up to 70% of the people who are actually doing the fighting are white allies and accomplices and things along those lines. There's hope for the future in a different way, right? There was a hope when President Obama was elected that there will be some kind of reckoning, not a harsh reckoning, but a reckoning of how we can come together and really become what we say we want to be as a United States of America.
Yes.
But now the generations of today, and I don't know which one it is. I don't know those that well, like Z and millennials.
Generation Z, I think, is the newest. The youngest ones.
These generations of students and young people who are coming along, they live a different existence, right? They understand intersectionality better than most from back in the day. They've been out doing community service and having friends from different gender expressions and different walks of life and things along those lines. So that kind of lends some hope to a future that, these individuals can kind of help make that change come, right? And so your thoughts on youth of today and where do we need to take it? How do youth get involved and their voices heard so that is a part of the significant changes that are coming in?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, right, to look, because I've done a lot of studying for millennials, right, on millennials in particular. But millennials now they're a lot older, right? They're basically those who are like entering into the workforce. They're upwards of 35 and 40 at this point. Gen Z that's coming after, right? So that's a lot of the younger people. What's interesting is that there are. This starts to get into the socialization aspect of it, right? Because what we know is that little children, like pick up what people are telling them, et cetera, right? But they don't have these inherent biases that a lot of us have after we've been alive for several years, right? And so they aren't really beholden to a lot of that stuff until they get older. Once that stuff starts to sit in, right, they're still getting messaging from other folks. And so it'll be interesting to see, there's going to be a lot more research that's coming out on Gen Z just to see like how they understand race, how they understand society. But we have seen that there are some groups within Gen Z that are, they're looking at some of the old ways of seeing things and talking about things, particularly like race, some of the stereotypes that exist, some of that, and some of them are thinking like, what, this doesn't really make any sense. Like, why are you against this person simply because they look different from you? Like that's ridiculous, right? They can see, like they can look at the makeup of different organizations and say like, that's a problem. Like, why is it 95% white? There's no reason for it to be like that, right? And so it'll be interesting to see kind of how they play out, because I keep saying interesting because originally what folks thought was that millennials were a lot less racist, overall in their ideology than their parents, right?
Right.
And what the research has actually shown is, they're just as racist as the folks that came before them.
Well, we
right?
saw that.
And so again,
the ages of the people who were out there January 6th didn't seem like they were their parents.
Absolutely, right. There were definitely a lot of older people, but there were a lot of people right there in their mid 30s, right? Parents of young children, right, who are out there doing that exact same stuff. But what's also interesting, and what speaks to the idea of, there being some difference that's coming out of the younger generation, is that what you've also been seeing is that there are a lot more children who are like not terribly, but outing their parents so hard, right? I don't know if you've seen some of the stuff on social media where they're like, some particularly a lot of like white children, like teenagers are like calling out their parents for being at the insurrection or saying these ridiculous things about other folks. They're like, this is not okay. Like, I don't think why are you saying these things? It's terrible. Right? We shouldn't be thinking that. And so we have some hope in that sense. The bigger problem though is the systems, because again, the way that our systems are set up, right? I talked about the fact that racism is embedded into our society. Until we do something to change those systems, we're going to continue to see that same ideology largely reproduced, right? That's really going to be the problem. So we really have to change it so that structurally we have some of these barriers that are removed that prevent folks from getting in, right? That prevent the pipeline, the access to the pipeline for Black males in education, like we were talking about earlier, or people being in different types of jobs or being able to be in different neighborhoods. We still see a ton of segregation, right? We're more segregated in many places now than we were back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Right.
And so we have to change that, or else we have this constant lingering danger that the generations coming are just going to grow into the same negative racial attitudes.
Right. So there's an exhaustion. There's a tiredness of having to continue to fight this fight. There's so many hills that we have to climb in order to make some of these changes happen. Textbooks need to be re-envisioned to include truth. There needs to be changes in how our government structure is kind of built, the lines that have been drawn to kind of keep people in power, and recognize what that looks like. Districts. I had a conversation yesterday, or actually on Tuesday, with a person from Missouri who was a part of a community that was 64% Black, and she was the first mayor in the township's complete, that was of color.
Yeah.
And the leadership in that area had always been white individuals, mainly white males. And so those things are what I think people are afraid of that's going to change, that there won't be the white male who is in the political or the power seat, so to speak. What do you see, or what are your thoughts about how we change that dynamic to make people recognize that there is power in their vote, there is power in their voice, they can do something, stimulate some change in our environment?
Sure. So, I think we've seen some of the recent election, I think, helps push some of that, right? We had, Warnock elected in Georgia, like flipping that state around. That was huge. Warnock was only the 11th Black senator in history, which is absurd. We're in 2021. Right. And so I think things like that help. They show that when you go out and vote, right, we had that significant push, from people like Stacey Abrams, who registered hundreds of thousands of new voters over the past decade, right? So showing people that their vote does count when they can, but not only showing them that, we also have to make sure that the laws are in place in such a way that their votes aren't being discounted or thrown out, that the lines aren't being drawn, right? They're not being
Right.
gerrymandered in ways that keep districts looking a certain way that are completely different than what the actual
Right.
population looks like. And so if I think a lot of that stuff helps to make significant pushes. Some of the legislation that's helping to restore the voting rights of felons who we know because of mass incarceration and racist laws, most of these people are Black and brown men, right? And so if we can do that, then I think that helps to shift the narrative a lot
And
and
that's
let
a
people know that their
conversation
vote
to
does
have.
count.
Right. That's a conversation to have. You talk about that, right? So there's supposed to be remediation for people who have gone to jail, right? And when they get released, they are supposed to have paid their dues and paid their price. So why was that stipulation even on top of that? So there's an added tax that has nothing to do with the sentence that was put upon this person for maybe the egregious acts that they've done or whatever have you. But if you can't be reformed by the process that was supposed to reform you, and you get out and you can't get a job, you can't vote, you can't do all these things, but yet that wasn't a part of the sentence. It wasn't in the sentence that said, okay, you're going to get 3 years or you're going to get 50 years or whatever. It didn't say you're going to get 3 years plus you're not going to be able to vote. You're not going to be able to get a job. You're not going to be able to do whatever once you get out. It's like, so what's the point of being rehabilitated or supposedly rehabilitated, and you get into the real life situations that people get in once they get released from incarceration?
Yeah, so I mean, the crazy part is that lots of people do research on this as well, right? That our prison systems, there's zero rehabilitation that happens, right? Or very little. Maybe it's unfair to say zero, but not a lot at all, right? And a lot of that is because our carceral system, as well as our policing system, right? Really, these were extensions of slavery. If you actually go back to the histories, the policing system we have now was effectively, they were slave patrols, right? That's what they came out of. And the way that in which the laws are written to incarcerate people was largely written so that it effectively created a new slave population once slavery was outlawed, right? That's one of the reasons why we continue to see significantly higher numbers of Black, in particular Black, but also Black and Latino, other brown men who are in prison, right? So they're, in part, it's because the system was never created to rehabilitate them. It was created to keep them in bondage, to be able to then use them to exploit their labor, to keep them away from, the good white people or the other folks in the society, right? And so rehabilitation was never a part of that. And so it's, for
And what
me
you're
and other
saying
scholars,
is
it's
they're
unsurprising.
released right back into the same system. So they're put away for a time, but then they're put back in the system where you still have to be beholden to someone in order to survive, so to speak, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Michelle Alexander talks about that in her book, right? The New Jim Crow. She talks specifically about this idea that there's all these different aspects to our system of incarceration. And the part where you're in prison, that's only one part, right? The part, like you're saying, that comes after you get out, that's a huge part of it that leads to a lot high recidivism rates where people go back to jail. But then the felony disenfranchisement, the ability to not get jobs, right? You have this felony on your record, and so you can't get hired. Like there's all these different things that are part of the system. And so it's really built in a way that keeps folks in. And so we really need to reimagine that in order to give people better opportunities.
Most definitely. So, wow, you said a mouthful right there with regards to that. So how do we bring it back home to UCF? What does UCF need to do? I mean, all the stuff that we talked about in this hour, we're coming up on about 6 or 7 minutes left. What can we do at UCF, or what should UCF be doing from either the administration down to the students in regards to helping to make change, especially with regards to social justice?
Sure. So I mean, I think there are so many different levels, and for me, this is one of the things I harp on a lot is that a lot of people often look for the one thing or the two things you can do to create change, and when in reality, because of the interconnectedness of all different things, you really need a multi-pronged approach where you're doing many different things at once. You can't just do one thing; it's not going and it's going to work. And so, some of it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, in terms of shifting the narratives of expectation for folks so that we are giving credit to people for doing the work they're doing, right? Even in my own department right now, one of the things we're trying to do now is to reevaluate our promotion and tenure documents and our other documents, for how you move up so that they're more inclusive of what the work that people are doing, right?
Right.
So that's something that UCF should be doing across the board, all departments, right? We want the marker should be more inclusion, not less. We shouldn't be excluding people, particularly an institution like UCF, which is really,
Right.
really big on innovation and newness, right, and excitement. I think we're positioned very well to be able to do stuff like that. So that's one of the things that we can do. I think then that would tie to and connect to work that people might want to do outside of UCF around the neighborhood, right? And so again, so right now I'm actually on the mayor of Orange County put together a task force on violence that's happening in various communities, and so I'm a part of that now. And so that's one of the ways that I'm serving, right? And so again, giving people credit for being able to do things like that would open the door for more folks to be involved, whether that's again right here in our own UCF Orlando community or abroad, right, in other places outside. So I think if you're shifting a lot of that, that opens the door for folks to be able to become more impactful. It also we also UCF is great in terms of access for folks in general, right? I love that about the university, right? We're a point of access for so many people, but ensuring that we continue that, right, so that we're reaching out really in directed ways to pull in more folks. One of the things that I think UCF could grow in is that if you look at the population of Black people in Florida and the percentage of Black students at UCF, they don't really match up. And so I think while we are a great point of access, maybe we could go out and do even more targeted recruitment to bring folks in, because there are so many folks that if you just give them a chance and you give them support, which I think UCF has the capacity to do as well, then we can bring that in. We can become even more of a place, right, where folks are coming, and UCF starts to look a lot more like the communities that surround it and the state of Florida that it's in.
And also taking the deficit model away from the way people think, right? So we say bring somebody in. A lot of times what people think, and you might have colleagues who think this way, that you bring in somebody who you want to give a chance, right? You say, well, they are really taking a spot away from somebody who's more deserving, right? And not taking into consideration the context as to why maybe this student who grew up in a school district that didn't have books, the student who didn't have the opportunity to grow up and have internet service during the pandemic because of life circumstances, and doesn't take away from their intelligence, but it does take away from the resources that they were able to have access to. And so how do we make people recognize that just because someone has limited access should not deter or hurt or harm their chances for success in the future?
Yeah, I think that's so important, right? And that gets back to these ideas of, if we think about cultural capital and in the knowledge that people have. And so often, we as the academy broadly, right, not even just UCF, we privilege certain types of knowledge and understanding over others. And we don't need to do that, right? That's one of the things that I definitely try to bring into my own classrooms, is that, and part of my teaching philosophy is that I believe students themselves are producers of knowledge. They come in with a level of expertise. They may not have certain subject matter expertise for the class, but they have life experience and expertise that comes from all these different areas. And we need to recognize that, right? And so again, I think UCF is, because of the type of institution we are, we're positioned really well to be able to do that and to say, like, we can shift that narrative, like you're saying. So it's not about, oh, you're taking a spot from somebody else. It's what is it that you're going to offer, because you have something to offer. The assumption that you're bringing in something very positive, and maybe will help with some areas that you might need some assistance with, but that doesn't mean that you are not intelligent, that there are different forms of intelligence that we don't recognize or privilege as much as others, and that you can't then go on and take all the stuff that you had before you got here incorporate what you learn here, and then make something brand new and
Right.
amazing as you leave.
And we didn't talk about power and control and all that other stuff, but you say on one hand, in a negative way, you're taking the space away from someone who's more deserving, but you're not looking at it the other way and saying they're taking the space away from somebody who's deserving.
Absolutely. Right. That's definitely something. Again, when you even think about who deserves, what does that even mean? Right. Like
And who
you
has the right?
already are privileging certain people, right?
Yeah,
You're saying these people are more deserving than these other people for some reasons that absolutely don't make sense, right? Like none at all. And so, yeah, if we can shift that narrative and just like we're bringing the people that are coming with knowledge, expertise, and that they are worthwhile, then
right.
we're shifting the model completely, and that's all of a sudden it's
So how
going
do
to
we
be
call
a
people
completely
on that?
different picture.
That's the question, right? How do we call people on that? Well, that's probably a question for another day. We're going to have to do a part
Yeah.
two. We're going to have to do a part two. And so I thank you for being a part of today's conversation. I think it opens the eyes to a lot of different things. It lets people know how multifaceted this whole thing is, right? There is so many layers. There are so many levels that we have to accomplish, right? It's almost like a video game in some sense, right? You gotta get to the next level, get to the next level. And this is
Absolutely.
exhausting, but we can get there. And so I appreciate your perspective today. In a very real sense, you are the younger generation. You are bringing the knowledge. There's a song, or there was a saying back in the day. Bringing the noise, right? And so we have to really embrace that in those who also have something to say, who have a voice, assistant professors, even our lecturers and people who are doing other things. They're making their mark as well, but we don't value them the same way, right? And the funny part about it is sometimes when a person becomes a full professor, they are so set in their ways and they don't really have any new innovative ways of doing things that hurts the innovative and positive things that are coming from the youth who are trying to enter into the academy as well. So I thank you. I thank you, man. You give us a lot of food for thought. And
Sure.
and as always, I appreciate having the opportunity to talk with you. We're going to have to bring you back. It's going to have to be part two. We're going to be part two.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. Yeah, and this was great. And I'll come back anytime. Just let me know. I'm on standby.
Excellent. So thank you all for tuning in today. We're going to turn it over to our folks over in the controls and just bring us out. So join us next time, and we'll be glad to continue to have these conversations around diversity and inclusion, and especially its impact on the University of Central Florida. Thank you, and have a great day.